Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. I'm channeling my inner Barack Obama. Fired up and ready to go. Excited today about the content we have for you for episode 264. And I want to start by giving a shout out to a few sources. We have a regular listener in Colorado who sent a great link to what we discussed last time, which is if anyone has information on iPad's change and how they're not going to be counting pre-apps as apps unless you could render decisions, send it in. So we got a great link. It came in. And then an article, actually, shout out to Michelle in the Pacific Northwest. She's a regular counselor out there, a member of our College Counselors Confab. That's our college counseling group that was birthed right through this podcast, where we bring together around 30, 35 college counselors, a mixture of school-based college counselors, both independent school and public school, CBO, and IEC, independent college counselors, and a few internationals. So she's a member of that team. We meet twice a year for a 75-minute meeting just to sharpen our skills and share what's going on out there in our sector of the woods. So she sent a great article in that I actually want us to talk about as one of our In the Newses. So you'll be hearing more on that Inside Higher Ed article that Julie and I will be doing the next time Julia's up in November. So excited about that. But I want to share something a little different, something that I haven't done before. So when I look back, I look at how many recommended resources we've shared with you guys, and it's kind of overwhelming when I look. We have them all up on yourcollegeboundkid.com under the resources tab. We have a recommended books, which I don't know how many's there, but I think we might be close to 70 books that we've recommended. Websites, I haven't counted, but it may be just as many. And then we actually had to create another category because we have these podcasts and all these different things as well. So it's over 150, recommended resources. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, if somebody's just trying to learn how all this works, it's great to have all these resources, but it could just be a tad overwhelming. So what I want to do today is I want to share my 3 favorite resources in one category. It's very important I'm saying this. One category. And what is this category? It's kind of how the sausage is made. What does that mean? It means if you were sitting around an admissions committee, how would they actually make decisions? What are the best resources I believe that are out there to help you to understand how does a school decide if they've got really good recommendations over here versus maybe modest test scores, maybe a unique location where it's very hard for them to get students from. All of that. Gender, how does that play a role? Major, first gen, race, grade trends, all the things that we talk about all the time, athletics, arts. How does that all sort of come together to result in decisions? And in my opinion, there are 3 books that stand out on that topic. And we have the kind of listeners who I really feel that I can say that if you're one of our regular listeners, you should read all 3 of these books. Because if you care enough about this process to consume 264 episodes, then you're all in. And so I want to share my 3 favorite books out there. And they're not new. These are resources we've recommended before in the Thursday episode. But I just thought for someone that might look at our resources and say, wow, this is great, but I'm overwhelmed. Like, I don't necessarily want to consume 150 things, particularly if I'm trying to figure out how schools actually make decisions. And I'm primarily talking about schools that make holistic decisions and not exclusively, but primarily selective schools. Okay, so, and they're not in any particular order, but I'm just going to tell you the three. So it's Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions by Jeffrey Solingo, must-read book. I personally love it as an audiobook. You get to see the year that he spent, where he alternated between Emory University in Atlanta, Davidson University just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, as well as the University of Washington. So you have three different kinds of schools there, right? Selective liberal arts school, got a national university, private midsize, and then you have a state flagship. So that's definitely worth reading. Another one that's absolutely worth reading is Valedictorians at the Gate. This is Rebecca Sabke. She was at Dartmouth for 13 years after being at St. Lawrence before that. She worked her way all the way up to being International Dean of Admission. And I'm personally a big fan of this one as an audiobook too. So maybe I'm showing you my bias with audiobooks, but I think she does a fantastic job of sort of helping listeners to understand how the pieces all come together, how decisions are made. And it's kind of funny too. So that's a great one. And then a third one is The Inequality Machine, How College Divides Us by Paul Tough. Just a fantastic, well-researched book that really helps you to understand how decisions are made. It traces the life of multiple different students from different socioeconomic areas, and you can see how they fare in the college process. But there's just a lot of history built into it as well. And you get that also with Who Gets In and Why. Like they go into the test, the SAT. What's the origin? What's the history? How has it changed? What iterations have you seen over the years? How does that impact decisions? It just puts everything together really nicely. And one of the things interesting in that book is it reveals some of the research from Caroline Hawksby, who's one of the two leading scholars in the world when it comes to the economics of education. I'd say Raj Chetty and Caroline Hawksby, they both used to be in Stanford together, but Chetty left for Harvard. But those are the two world's leading scholars when it comes to studying the economics of education, in my opinion. And I think that's probably indisputable. Certainly it would win if there were a bunch of people voting on that topic. And Hawksby has some really interesting research that gets shared in that book on the inequality machine. Some of that, it conflicts with some of the evidence that we've talked about from Frank Bruni's Where You'll Go is Not Who You'll Be. And we often say, talk about that. But she shares some evidence to show that there is a correlation from a financial standpoint, between lifetime earnings and the selectivity of the school. But there's a lot of other information in there. And so, but it's good to hear that perspective so you can process and kind of hear both sides. Probably talking about that more than I need to. That's literally 1/30 of the book. But there's just so much juice and meat in that book. And so those are the three books. And there's one that I had a hard time keeping off, but I'm going to tease you guys. You got to come back 10 days, episode 267, not this Thursday, but next Thursday. I'm going to share a resource that I had a hard time keeping up. I wanted to go with 4, and I stuck with 3, and I got a runner up. And that fourth one will be the recommended resource, not this Thursday, because that was coming from John Bockenstead. He's got a great one that I want to share for this Thursday. But the following Thursday, I'll tell you the fourth book that I had a really hard time keeping off of this list. Okay. So, friends, I want to share a little bit with you about my own evolution and my understanding of test scores. So I'm personally struggling adjusting to the new norm. Now, I've talked about it on here. Julie and I had a great conversation a few weeks ago talking about how you need to use class of 2026, class of 2025, the 2 years since the majority of kids did not submit test scores. We talked about that, the class of 2021, where 56% were test optional, class of 2022, 52%. You know, it's probably confusing because when I say 21 and 2022, I'm giving you high school classes. If I say 25, 26, I'm giving you the college graduation year. And I probably should just be consistent. Stop confusing everybody. But the last 2 years, okay? Let's just say, keep it simple, the last 2 years. You need to be looking at the last 2 years if you're trying to figure out, should I submit my scores or not? And I'm just struggling right now because I'm so used to the old numbers, and these new numbers are just blowing me away. And I used to think it was outrageous when I had students asking me, should I submit? But it's a really good question. Case in point, a very strong student with close to a perfect math score and just a tad under 1,500 asked me about 6 weeks ago whether they should submit their scores to a school that's one of the 15 most selective schools in the country. And I was stumped. I reached out. Julie and I talked. We both weren't clear. We went back and forth. Could kind of make a case both ways. Well, I would now tell that student, and I actually have told that student, don't submit your scores. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me this week. A couple things, actually. One was I had a student visiting a school. I'm not going to mention the school, but I'll just say it's a school that probably a lot of people haven't heard of, even though it's a very good school. And the school just flat out came in and said, do not turn scores in if you have under 1,400. The student was a little disappointed because he kind of worked really hard to get his 1,390. And the person even said, repeat after me, do not submit your scores if you have under 1,400. It's going to hurt you, not help you in our process. And so he actually went up to the person doing the information session afterward. So are you saying I shouldn't submit my 1,390? He said, I could not be clear. Do not submit your 1,390. So that was the first thing. And, that's a school that would have been happy to have a 1,330 2 years ago. Now they're saying don't turn in your 1,390. And then the other one, this one rattled me a bit. So the student I'm working with, it's an athlete actually. So they're going through the athletic pre-read process. Now they're applying to a very selective school, one of the 1%ers, 1% of the hardest schools to get into, not an Ivy, by the way. And so they reached out to see whether they're going to be approved, as an athlete through the athletic process. And the student had a very high test score, okay? In fact, I'll tell you what the test score was. It was a 790 math and a 690 in evidence-based reading and writing, so 1,480. And so they present the scores and the transcript and everything, for the pre-approval. And then the admission officer got back to the coach via email with some guidance and some advice. And then the family I'm working with forwarded the email to me. Now, this is what the admission officer said, and I kid you not, this is a quote. These scores are weak. Do not submit them. Now, I'm not saying that to stress people out. I'm saying this to let you know that all the rules have changed. It is very, very different now. That was a selective non-Ivy school. So the question is, how do you know whether to submit or not submit? It's a long and it's a complicated question because the truth of the matter is, just to be completely honest, it's different rules for different people, depending on your institutional priority. But what I'll say is this. If you are either Caucasian with college-educated parents, not coming from a rural area that's deemed very rural out in the middle of nowhere, or you're Asian and you're not in an underrepresented Asian category, then there's a pretty straightforward system that you can use. And I'll teach it to you. Now, this will not apply if you're in a group that's going to be deemed underrepresented. So who would that be? Well, it could be rural kids. It could be Native Americans. It could be Black or African American. It could be Latino. It could be foster care kids. It could be a state that they have a very difficult time getting kids from, like Wyoming, Montana, South North Dakota. There's several things that won't apply here. But if you are Caucasian or Asian and you have college-educated parents, and you're not coming from a very unique remote area, there is a pretty straightforward system you can use. So what you do is you go into your Common App, and you're getting bonus stuff. This is like a tip, but it's kind of time sensitive. I don't even want to wait till Thursday. I want to get this to you guys in your hands now because a lot of people are making decisions now. They're turning in applications now. Do I submit? Do I not submit? I'm getting this question nonstop. So I want to kind of give you a system. When you go into your Common application, and everyone who's applying to college pretty much can have a Common App, commonapp.org. You go to your dashboard. You'll see all your colleges listed. Click any one of them. You'll see a big bold hyperlink. Click the hyperlink, and it will take you to the college information page. Some people call it the college details page, college information page. You'll see a couple links toward the top. You'll see one that will say college website, then it'll say virtual tour, then it will say college navigator. Click the college navigator link. Once you click the college navigator link, it'll take you right into IPED's data for the college fall of 2021. So it's recent. It's a year ago, class a year ago. Okay, go to the admissions tab and then go down to test scores. You'll see SAT, ACT. First thing you'll see is the percentage of people that applied, that actually submitted the SAT and ACT, which is always fascinating because I've seen numbers as high as 90% for some schools, and I've seen numbers under 30% for other schools. So that's fascinating. You can see what percentage submitted or didn't submit it. You can see whether the school gets more SAT or ACT testers as well. Remember, schools regard both tests equally, unless you're Georgetown. But other than that, everybody else I know of regards both tests equally. So, but then you want to drop to the level below, and they'll show you the 25th percentile for SAT, evidence-based reading and writing, math, and then ACT as well. 25th percent, 75th percent, the middle 50%. Add that number up on the 25th percent column, add the number up on the 75th percent column, divide by 2, and ask yourself, is my score over that or under that? So this could be confusing. So if I had an example, if you looked up a school and it said 600 was the 25th percentile for evidence-based reading and writing, and it said the 75th percentile was 700, then you would add 600 plus 700, divide by 2, 650. And then if it said on the 75th percentile, if it said 700 was the 75th percentile, and 800, you divide that by 2, 750. 750 plus 650 would be 1,400. Then you would compare your score to that 1,400. And if it's at that point, you would submit. If it's below, you don't submit. And so I don't know if this worked. This is the kind of thing that would have worked better visually. But I'm trying to get this information into your hands as quickly as possible, because it's probably the most frequently asked question I'm getting right now. Should I submit or should I not submit? And everybody is using the new norms. One more thing I'll say, this is research Carolyn Hawksby, that same economist I told you about earlier, has done. She has research to show that the overwhelming majority of times students pick the school with the higher SAT scores over the school with the lower SAT scores. And the numbers are eerily high for upwardly mobile families. The times when you see departure from that is when finances are a big factor in the decision. So colleges know that as well. And so they don't want to put there if the public is going to judge them by their scores. So that's one reason why you're seeing guidance. Don't send low scores to us, because if we're going to have to hurt ourselves in this process and make it harder for us to yield kids, then you're going to have to be stronger than average if you're submitting scores to us that are, below what we normally see. It's not like they want to do that, but they know that's how they're being judged. That's how they're being evaluated. They feel they can't ignore it. And that's the general mindset of the general population, of the general school population. And then people don't like that. They say, oh, it's marketing. That's just the way that it is. It's the reality that you live in. And especially if you're at a highly selective school doing holistic admissions. The people that may not think that way are schools that are public schools that take a broad swath of the population, test optional, test blind schools. People that live in that world, this won't apply to. But for the rest of everybody, it does.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, we have a very exciting interview today. It's a new interview. It's one Lisa's doing, and she's doing the interview with Nick Gozik. And Nick Gozik is a very impressive person. He is the Dean of Global Education at Elon University. And prior to that, he's had quite a distinguished career, having leadership positions at Boston College, the University of Richmond, NYU, Duke, and he's also done research for the Social Science Research Council on race, international issues, and education. He's got a master's in French and a PhD in international education from NYU. And after a brief introduction from Lisa, Nick expands on that introduction. Then Nick gives us all advice on how to make decisions at every stage of our career. Nick talks about the value of going abroad. He shares why he believes students should go abroad. He shares what to do if you're unable to go abroad to still get some of the benefits of going abroad. Lisa shares an experience when she steps outside her comfort zone and went abroad for 4 whole months. Then Nick shares what he means by high impact practices. He shares the history of U.S. students going abroad, going back over 100 years. And he talks about some of the challenges, some of the things that can go wrong when you go abroad. And finally, he closes with his new book that's coming out called A House Where We All Belong, Redesigning Education Abroad for Inclusive Excellence. It's a 2-part interview with Lisa and Dr. Nick Gozik. Listen and enjoy.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I am a co-host on Your College Bound Kid. And today I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Nick Gozik, who is an expert in global education. And we are going to talk about issues and changes in global education. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Gozik.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, I'm just going to tell everyone a little bit about you. And I'll just warn everyone he has a very impressive and lengthy resume. So button it up because here we go. But right now, Dr. Nick Gozik is Dean of Global Education and an assistant professor at Elon University. But prior to that, he's held positions in education abroad at Boston College, the University of Richmond, New York University, and Duke University. He's also served as a visiting assistant professor at New York University, where he taught courses in research methodology and international education, and as a research consultant for the Social Science Research Council. There, he conducted research on identity, race, and education. In addition, he's contributed to research at the Social Science Research Council on internationalization, interdisciplinarity, and boundary crossing in U.S. higher education. More recently, his research and publications have focused on education abroad, looking at both outcomes assessment and diversity and inclusion. To do all that, he has a master's in French language and civilization and a PhD in international education from New York University. So, wow, that must have kept you busy. Tell us how you got into this line of work and became interested in global education, and a little bit about your journey to where you are now.
That could take a while, just because many of our journeys are so complex. But thank you again for having me on. The content, the perspective that you bring to this is really interesting, as I mentioned earlier too. For me, one of the things I always say that as a kid, I didn't necessarily dream of going into international education. I didn't know what international education was. But I always had, for whatever reason, an interest in international. I can't quite explain what that is. Part of it might have been that I was born in Australia to U.S. parents. So my first few years were in a very different place with a different accent and different cultural norms. And I remember some of those changes coming to the U.S. And, as I went through college, I then started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I entered actually the world of technology. I was in IT for 2 years. And there was still this part of me that felt like I wanted to do something more. I wanted to expand more. And I took a plunge. I decided to go to France and to do a master's degree. And it ended up being the best thing that I ever did by sending me on a very different path. And one of the things that I've learned through all of this is really go with what makes you excited, what brings you joy. There's a book years ago, do what you love and the money will follow. And that really allowed me to make decisions from that point onwards as to, at each stage, what I really was excited about. And once I did that, I lived in France. I did a master's in Paris through New York University and took classes at the Sorbonne. After that, I ended up teaching English in France. And as I was ready to come back, I had a question as to what was I going to do next. And I talked to a friend of mine who was interested in international education. She didn't follow that path. She's actually a minister. But it stuck with me. And I realized that for me, going abroad was one of the most impactful things that I had ever experienced, and how much it had changed me and kind of opened me up on lots of different levels to something bigger and different. And I wanted other students to be able to have that experience. And so since then, I've committed my career to working with students and faculty and staff in lots of different kinds of ways. And I've worked at a variety of institutions, large or small, and went on and did a PhD that allowed me to continue from a scholarly perspective that work. So that's how I got interested. I think I'm not alone in that journey, but it's one that has made me really proud and happy to do what I do.
Well, I'm sure you're making a huge impact on students, with at Elon, right, where you're working now, but also all over the world with your research and the book that you're going to be putting out very soon. Um, so you've mentioned that you got a lot out of, studying abroad and a global education, and it kind of changed your worldview. So tell us why you think that students now should pursue a global education.
I've thought a lot about this. I can honestly not think of a single job moving forward that won't require students to deal with people who are different, to deal with difference overall. You could be a teacher in rural North Carolina, you could be a healthcare professional in New York City, or you could live abroad. Um, Here in Alamance County, where Elon University is located, we have a large Latinx population. We have a large African American population. You don't have to go very far to get immigrants, migrants from literally all over the world. We have to be able to deal with people who are different. So I've started to ask the question around global in a different kind of way. I used to think about what students would get from individual experiences. I go abroad for this amount of time. What will I get out of that experience? It's incredibly hard to measure, to evaluate, because a lot of the impact comes years later. Maybe it's months later, but often years later. But if we think about this, actually, if we flip this question around and we say, what do we want students to gain after 4 years, let's say, at an undergraduate institution, or 2 years if it's an associate's degree, then we want students to be prepared for a world where that difference exists. And so part of that is being able to go abroad or go away, do something. It can also be on campus, it can be in the local community that allows someone to come into contact with people who are different and allows us to question and rethink some of our suppositions.
Right. So it sounds like that for you, it would be like meeting somebody who's different from yourself and maybe immersing yourself in that culture or that difference. And what do you think that allows students to learn about themselves, or how do you think it improves their functioning in the world going forward?
Yeah, I just had lunch with a candidate for our admissions office today. She's applying for a position for international admissions, and we started talking about her background. She'd come to Elon as an undergraduate. She had gone abroad. She'd gone abroad to Italy. She did another short-term experience internationally as part of a choral group. And then she went and she spent 3 years in Berlin. And she went not really having a plan, and she wanted to explore and to kind of do something very different. What I found in my conversation with her, and what I've actually also found as a manager, because I've supervised a number of people over the years, is there's a difference in how flexible people are. So the folks that I have that have lived overseas, particularly if they've lived overseas for a longer period of time or in a more challenging location, I see gradations, I see nuances, or those that grew up in a bilingual household, or those that grew up having to code switch. They're able to shift more easily. They're less concerned about the day-to-day hiccups that come up because they've had to pivot. And we've used that word pivot for the last 2 years, that everyone has had to do that, right? But you can watch people navigate, and you can also watch them be more open to ideas and be able to be more nimble and less concerned about sticking with what we know. And that doesn't happen for every single person. So a lot of what I think we can and should talk about are individual differences and individual trajectories. Some people move more quickly along a continuum than others. A lot of that depends on how much of yourself you put out there, how willing you are to take risks, the kind of program, the kind of experience that you have, and how much it pushes you. But there is definitely a noticeable difference in the aggregate that we see based on research, and I would say based on my own personal experience and having students go through that. So again, if you go into the workforce, there is George Koop, who's the one that really has done research on high impact practices and put out something that lots of universities are thinking and working around. He'll show a diagram of when you start to stack these high impact practices. And the more that you have and the more kind of agility that you gain from that actually then becomes noticeable in terms of research terms. And you can stack study, you can stack research, you can stack internships. And the more that you do that, the more you're able to frankly be more open and more able to adapt. So those are some things that I've seen both in research and working with students.
Right. And I think those are such important elements. As a psychologist, one thing that we're always trying to work with people is to develop more, emotional flexibility, to be able to accept things or change their way of thinking about something. And then, cognitively to be able to be a, more abstract reasoner, or to be able to, switch ideas, and just that idea of just being able to tolerate things that are a little bit uncomfortable. If you in life can tolerate some uncomfortable things, then I think you can accomplish a lot of great things.
Yeah, I would agree. There are kind of two ways of thinking about the broad experience. One is we've got some students, particularly when we think about mental and physical kinds of challenges, some students that feel like the minute they go abroad, everything is going to be better, everything is going to change immediately. And you bring who you are with you, right? And you bring some of that baggage, you bring some of that those life experiences. And so, for example, we've had some students that have decided, not to take their medication. They're in a better place, which is it's not a good decision.
No,
right?
no, bad.
Yeah. And so, we have those conversations with students. And so I think, there's a recognition that not everything will change on a dime. But the other side of that is, and I noticed that this in my own life, is that ability to actually start to kind of think about things differently, not just in terms of cultural differences, but actually who we are. And there's, again, not every student will follow that journey. But when you can do that, this is an opportunity to start to think in more abstract terms, start to yeah.
Yeah, I went to the University of Chicago a very long time ago, and I don't think anyone ever mentioned study abroad to me. So when I got older and more settled and realized I had missed that experience, I kind of regretted it. But I have gone abroad on several different occasions, and they've always, I think, been sort of life-changing experiences for me, and really helped me see, number one, I'm such an American. I'm so like embedded in American culture and the American viewpoint, but that there are so many other ways to even define what it means to be a person. I spent 4 months in India when we adopted Lily, and I lived with my husband's Indian family while he went back to the United States to work, because the whole thing was fabulously expensive. And that just taught me so much about how they viewed family and how the individual wishes or needs were kind of subservient to the needs of the group in a way that I think Americans, like, we kind of don't understand that, or we chafe at that. But it was really just, it was life changing to be in that kind of situation. It wasn't always comfortable, but I came back a different person, than I went. So, I just think that I hope that lots of students will get the chance to pursue these kinds of experiences, because I really do think, well, it'll make us stronger as a nation and as a society. Um, I know I read in some of your work that you were kind of moving away from a tourist model of study abroad to more of a culture engagement. So I read that apparently the people who used to go abroad the most were white women, and I was like, oh, great. That's fabulous. But, so tell us more about the cultural engagement model and how that looks different than how study abroad used to be.
Yeah. So study abroad in the U.S. really began in the 1920s, and the very first group that went abroad were from the University of Delaware, were a group of men, and but shortly after that, the programs that really started to send institutions abroad included, places like Mount Holyoke at Wellesley, the Seven Sister Schools, and so the early model for education abroad was really designed around this group of students, and particularly students that were white, female, humanities, maybe social sciences, wealthy or at institutions that could support this kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be clear, the many of the people in my life, fit that category, and I care a lot about those people. So,
Of course.
so this isn't, but it is around diversifying who goes abroad, what one does, and ideally what one gets out of these experiences. So the first set of experiences, in many ways were designed almost like a finishing school, if we were going to be really honest. It was about gaining certain kinds of social capital that would allow one to be successful in an environment back in the US. And so, not always necessarily touristic. In fact, there are earlier models that we see, for example, in the 1960s, a really strong program in India was developed, around research in Varanasi. And you had a number of people that went through and they spent a full year doing really deep dives in research that often students aren't necessarily able to do today with double majors and minors and all of that. So it hasn't always been a one-way trajectory, but there is something about kind of some of the earlier models of coming in, kind of taking away from that place, enjoying and coming out, that doesn't necessarily leave the local community better off and doesn't necessarily leave our students feeling like they've really gained a lot more real intercultural awareness, the kind of the cross-cultural knowledge that we just talked about. And so, as we think about different ways of getting at some of this, the models have begun to change, and not always, and not at every institution and every provider, but where we are seeing conversation around is how do we kind of upset that? So, for example, in our programs abroad, we've got centers in London and Florence. Had conversations with staff in both of those locations. And in London, one of the things that is already going really well from my perspective is the fact that every student has to do an internship. And that makes them nervous, actually. That point when they have to get on the tube and go out on their own and go to an internship where they don't have the same support system, really kind of, is, for some students, it's totally fine. They're from big cities. For other students, that alone, is a bit of a shock that really helps them grow. In our location in Florence, we're moving in the direction of having all students do some kind of service on the ground. So we're identifying places where students can go in to work with the local community. That stacking of experiences that we talked about before, there's high impact practices that we're going to have study, we're going to have community involvement. All of that starts to pivot what we want students to see from this. There is too, as we look at images that are used, as we look at the narratives that students put out, that we quote and that we replicate. I've long moved away from, and I know we still have some on our website, but other institutions I've been at, and as we start to produce new publications, moving away from just simply beautiful scenery, images of students that are lined up, in front of some kind of landmark.
Right.
That's not a bad thing, because those students are commemorating a really wonderful experience that they just had, and they should take that photo. But as we're putting out images about a program and about a kind of experience and trying to shift that narrative, moving away from that to one in which students are engaging with people and we're actually showing what we want and we want to gain, showing students interning, showing students doing service, doing research. All of that starts to shift a narrative that I hope we'll see on campus. Now, one thing I would say is that those prevailing narratives have been with us for decades. And so it's not the kind of thing that we automatically overnight shift. Students are coming in with expectations. Parents have expectations. And I think we have to be collaborating with each other in order to be able to really change the stories that we tell around these experiences.
Right. And I think you make a great point, like the student who is nervous about the internship and getting around in a strange city. I mean, yeah, that is nerve-wracking, but it's also a great experience. And if you feel like you can master that, then you go through life with a lot more confidence.
Yeah.
And to be able to really understand a culture from a different way by doing service, I think is amazing. And I guess, yeah, it probably would, be great to, keep fleshing out those brochures with pictures of that, and trying to tell kids why should I put myself in that uncomfortable situation instead of just taking a picture in front of the Eiffel Tower, right?
Yeah. But it's also working with parents too, so that we're working together. I think for many of
Hmm.
us, we care so much about our student that we so much want to like pick them up when they fall. That's what we've
Hmm.
been wanting to do since kids were small or students arrived on our campus. And so some of that is also a kind of terrifying thing. Your student is 3,000 miles away and they're dealing with
Yes.
some kind of hiccup. Like the first reaction is, how do I get in and how do I help, maybe fix this, or how do I work with them? When sometimes what a student really wants is someone to vent to, someone to talk to, because it's hard. But that is not bad always. Sometimes there are
No.
situations where we have to get involved because something's wrong, but that's different than those moments where there may be the thing that should happen to get them to kind of push a little bit further.
Right. I have a kind of funny vignette that happened to my daughter, who, if everyone doesn't know, she's studying abroad through Elon in Sorrento, Italy this summer. But she and her friend went to Naples and they were doing stuff in Naples and they were coming back on the last train. And so the train said, it's going to Sorrento. It had Sorrento on the sign. The conductor said, "We're all aboard to Sorrento." Well, I guess his shift was over. And he decided he wasn't going all the way to Sorrento, which was like another 45 minutes. So he pulled over. I guess there's this little side line, train line that goes to a smaller suburb. I think it's called, and I'm probably going to mess this up, Poggio Marino. And he's like, "Yeah, we're stopping here." And all the people are shouting him in Italian, and there's this big consternation. So Lily and her friend are just standing on, this platform. And they're like, "Okay, that's no problem. We'll get a cab." Well, there are no cabs.
Yeah.
And so, okay, we'll try to find a hotel. I guess we'll have to stay here. There are no hotels. So at that point, that's when I got the tearful phone call from the
Yeah.
platform of the train station. So, we just kind of like, there's a pizza restaurant over there. So they went over, they talked to the guy. Nope. No, you're not going to get back to Sorrento tonight. And so, but they went online, they found like somebody who had an Airbnb named Denise. And they like contacted her and she said, "Yeah, that's no problem. You can come stay here tonight." So they're wandering around. I don't know if you've probably been to Naples, but the tiny curved alleys and they're trying to find Denise's house. Right. And so finally they think they found Denise's house and they ring the doorbell and this guy who's clearly not Denise answers the door and they try to talk to him. He's like, "Wait, I don't understand any English." So he runs and he gets like five of his friends and they all understand a little bit of English. And so between the five of them, they understand what they're looking for and she shows them the profile of the Airbnb and like, "Oh, Denise. Oh yes, she's our friend. We know Denise." So they just all piled into this car, which, for me as an adult to hear this terrifying, but
Yeah.
then they called Denise, they let them know they were coming. They took them to Denise. Denise had a snack for them because she knew they were stressed out. And then, they got up the next morning and took the train. But I thought that, they kind of experienced so much about Italian culture, right? Just in those 12 hours, as well as figuring out how do I solve a, seemingly
Yeah.
unsolvable problem.
Well, it is scary. I mean, and it's frustrating on top of it. On my way back this last time from Sorrento to Naples, the train stopped and, we intended to get out to get back on. There was a strike and there were, and it was either wait or, and we had the same kind of thing. You couldn't get a cab. So it does it, in those moments you are tired often, late, you're frustrated. It doesn't feel like a great learning moment. That's not what
Hmm.
you're really concerned about at the moment. But I think the resilience that came out of like that persistence that came out of.
Hmm.
Now, there's some things there. I agree. I might want to would have done a little bit differently. In terms of like getting in the car and those kinds of things.
Right, right.
But at the same time, there I agree about culturally, like the relationships and kind of like what you observe in those moments. It's fascinating. It is how you grow. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will tell Lily that you had the same problem with the train, and I know it's going to
Okay.
make her feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
um, yeah, no, that's funny. Now, you have a new book coming out, which is very exciting. It's going to be published in a couple of months, right?
Yeah.
And it is called A House Where We All Belong: Redesigning Education Abroad for Inclusive Excellence. Can you tell us more about the book and, what you think about the need to restructure global education to make it more inclusive?
Yeah. Thank you. This ties into what we were talking about earlier as well, in many ways. It's really the sequel to a book that I co-edited with a colleague, Ifsa Butler, the president and CEO of IFSA Butler, Heather Barclay Hamir, we wrote we co-edited a volume called Promoting Inclusion in Education Abroad. And one of the things that we realized is education abroad has been around for a number of years. Many people, a lot of resources have gone into it. But there was no one volume devoted specifically to this topic. So in that first book, we looked at different populations that were historically underrepresented in education abroad. We looked at males, we looked at students of color, students with disabilities, students at community colleges, students in the STEM fields, so on and so forth. And the idea was to think about strategies for each of these groups where we could reach out, we could do more in terms of increasing participation. And we realized with that book that we were really half done with that work, because the other part of this is also about belonging and belongingness and making sure that all students really feel like they're part of an experience, or that this is something for them. So if we take a couple steps back, the question about who these programs were originally designed for. Education abroad, again, if we're thinking about white females, humanities, social sciences, in terms of class, either upper, middle class, or at institutions with means, that is who many of the programs were designed around. They were designed in terms of the kinds of offerings, the locations, particularly in Western Europe. They were designed really in terms of immersion, linguistic immersion, based on the number of majors. And they've done really well in lots of different kinds of ways, and they have evolved over time. They haven't just been stuck in one point in time. But Heather and I, in the second book, which will be published by the Forum on Education Abroad, have kind of said, we're at this point that if we continue with the status quo, and we continue to shift this, and we continue to shift that, we are not really going to make the difference that we all say is needed. So essentially what we're arguing for in this book is that we take all of the cards and we throw them up in the air, and we ultimately put them in different kinds of, in a different order. So this book is really designed to follow a student through the process of education abroad. And so what is their very first encounter when they arrive on a campus or start to work with a third-party provider, in terms of the marketing, in terms of the messaging. It then follows them through the application process, the advising structures. When they get abroad, the housing, the kinds of the preparations, the kinds of activities, the class experience. And then when they come back, how do we make sure that we reintegrate those students in a way where that sense of belonging is there? And so if we do that with a much wider range of students in mind, our argument is that the cumulative effect, the entire process, will allow us to not just recruit more students, but make sure that the programs are really designed for a more diverse group of students. So that's really what the project is about. And we started this project before the pandemic. Like a lot of projects, it's taken longer as a result. But at the same time, we have kept lockstep with the changes around us. And I can't think of a better time. In fact, I've argued elsewhere that if we don't take advantage of this moment where so much is in flux, if we don't support in different kinds of ways, we're going to be losing a really important opportunity. It's a transformative learning moment for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so if we take hold of this, instead of just going back to quote unquote normal, there is a really great potential for us to move forward in these kinds of ways.
Yeah, and I thought, even when I read the thesis of this book, I was like, duh, of course we need to do this. There are all these barriers for people who are, let's say, first generation, low income students. They don't even know to apply for study abroad. They certainly can't afford it. And then once they get there, the programs are not designed to engage them in the same kind of way. And they might feel like sort of like they're not fitting in, even with their own student peer group. So, and I know that Elon does a lot to try to help everyone afford some kind of study abroad experience, but that's unfortunately not yet the case at all institutions.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, in next week's episode, Vince is back. And I shouldn't say next week, it's really Thursday, but we'll be talking about an article in the Oregonian called Record Number of First-Year Students Withdraw from the University of Portland. And Lisa and I will be starting a brand new question and answer series that will go 3 parts. We'll be looking at the question, why is it that colleges take a student with lower GPA and lower test scores over a student with higher GPA and higher test scores? We'll be exploring all the reasons why that happens all too frequently. It'll be the final part of my interview with John Bockenstead, the Vice Provost of Enrollment at Oregon State University. We'll just be covering a wide range of different topics in this final interview. We'll be seeking his advice, and of course, I'll put him on the hot seat. We hope you join us on Thursday. See you then, everybody. And remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.